public sector, and then to win the next election, you promise obscene and insane benefits, and then you finance your tax breaks that you give to certain parts of the population through borrowing cheaply in the international markets, because the international markets are not aware of the risk attached to lending to you, then you get yourself in a mess like this. There is certainly a need for a complete overhaul of how the country is run, and there's no question about that.
Miranda, is it ultimately still most likely that somebody, possibly Germany, will hand Greece an enormous amount of money? Yes, in a sense rewarding the way Greece has behaved, but it's not money Germany was ever going to get anyway. Will they simply have to do that one way or another?
Well, I mean, they have said that they want to support Greece. They are concerned about contagion to the rest of the euro area. European banks are not ready to take the hit right now from a Greek default. And so, yes, they will continue to support Greece, but of course on the condition that Greece helps itself.
And we're told, apparently, that the Americans, in a phone call on Sunday night, asked the Eurozone ministers how they were going to do this, if it was going to be done, and there were no ideas on how to do it, because it can't be forced through, can it, that deal? It has to be struck somehow. There has to be an agreement.
There has to be an agreement, and the reason why more money is needed at this stage is because the original standby agreement assumed that Greece can reaccess capital markets in the middle of next year. But with spreads where they are, this is out of the question. So the 65 billion euros that the program assumed Greece would be able to borrow in capital markets in the crucial 2 years coming up, 2012 and 13, have to come up from some other source. So it's not that Greece blew the targets and is asking for more money. It's just that Greece needs more official money because it cannot access any private financing.
Given what you've described in terms of the way the country is structured and this rather unhealthy relationship between politics and business, is any sort of reform of that nature being put on the table?
Well, Greece
or is the IMF insisting upon any of that? It would seem logical that it should.
Greece has a huge governance problem, and they missed the boat decade ago when they joined the euro area. At that time, interest rates literally collapsed to historically low levels. But instead of using the room, the breathing space created by the reduction in debt service costs, they used it to increase primary spending. And I guess the EU also was not strict enough in terms of ringing the alarm bells and saying, hey, wait, you know, your debt is not declining even though interest rates have collapsed and growth is booming. So, of course, when the international crisis hit, Greece got into a huge mess.
Again, if you've just joined us, let's recap for you. Tension is absolutely sky high in Greece tonight, both inside and outside the country's parliament. You're looking at the live shot of the parliament in Athens there. The Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Papandreou, is fighting for his job. He faces a vote of confidence. Well, we've been saying any moment now for a while, but by now it really is any moment now. He calls it a contract with the Greek people, a duty of a superhuman kind. If he loses, in effect, international loans are likely to come to a stop. Greece will run out of money. If he survives, which does now look likely, the result will be more hugely unpopular austerity measures. There are about 10,000 protesters outside Parliament. They've been there for about 4 or 5 hours, and we've seen the kind of trouble there's been in the streets just recently. People are massing outside, many saying they simply cannot take more bitter economic medicine. With us here in the studio is Martina Stevis, London-based correspondent for the Greek newspaper Eleftherotypia, and Miranda Ksafa, who's a senior strategist at IJ Partners, used to be chief economic advisor to Konstantin Mitsotakis, the Greek Prime Minister then, and an executive board member at the IMF. Can we just ask you again, are we wrong in assuming that this vote will probably go the Prime Minister's way?
No, you're not. The Prime Minister managed a good deal last week in his reshuffling of government. He gave power to his archenemy in the parliament, in his own party. So Evangelos Venizelos, who had in the past challenged him for the party leadership, is now not only finance minister, so the face of the country in negotiations, but also deputy prime minister.
But of course, as we've been saying, winning the vote in parliament doesn't in any way necessarily sell this to the people.
No. On the contrary, in fact, perhaps some people will see this as just, reshuffling the same deck rather than proposing any new solutions. Mr. Venizelos has his merits compared to his predecessor, Mr. Papakonstantinou, in that he's more plugged in the reality in Greece. He is more close to the public sector workers who he will definitely need on his side if he can get the tax collection improving. But at the same time, this is still the same government, and people out there know it, and that's exactly why they're protesting.
Miranda, what are we to make of the fact that the euro itself has not collapsed, for example, against the US dollar? It seems to have oscillated between 141 and 148 against the US currency.
Well, the US is not exactly a fiscal paradise either.
That's the end. It's quite as simple as that? Or do you think that actually people are not so unclear as to what's going to happen next that it's difficult to make a bet either way?
Well, I think also the ECB has taken a sort of hawkish stance, and that has helped the euro.
So if there were an option of Greece leaving the Eurozone, well, do you think that that is an option, or do you think that's just...
I think that would be political and economic suicide for Greece. It would definitely not solve its debt problem, because...
Would it solve any problems for the Eurozone?
Not even. And, again, from Greece's perspective, it's not going to solve its competitiveness problem either. Which is why some people have been advocating a return to the drachma, because Greece's competitiveness problem is not due to high wages in the private sector. It's due to regulatory impediments to competition and to restrictive labor practices. So you can only deal with those through structural reforms, and that's what is in the IMF-EU memorandum and needs to be implemented. It doesn't matter how much you devalue, you will still be left with all these structural impediments to competitiveness. Greece used to devalue very frequently while it had the drachma, but competitiveness did not improve ultimately because of all these structural problems.
But the Eurozone countries are going to be paying for this for some years to come, aren't they?
Yes and no. I mean, if Greece left the euro area today, okay, it's not going to solve Greece's problems. It will only make them worse, much worse. But I don't think it's going to solve the euro area's problems either, because Greece is not the only country facing a problem right now. You have two other countries, Ireland and Portugal, also having adopted IMF-EU supported programs. And you have other countries that also are on edge.
Miranda, let's just bring it. That breaking news just come through. We were being slightly wary with this. We now have it from two sources, making it clear the Greek government has won that vote of confidence, overcoming this first hurdle in winning new financing to avoid bankruptcy for the country. Latest figures suggest more than half the deputies in that 300-strong parliament backed the socialist government of the Prime Minister George Papandreou. He reshuffled his cabinet, as we've been saying last week, to try to stiffen resolve behind this painful new austerity programme. So a victory for George Papandreou of sorts, but what do we make of it here?
Well, I think what we've been saying, both of us, in different words tonight, is that this is a very small hurdle compared to what's coming up next. We foresaw that he would win that confidence vote. I personally foresee that he'll be able to squeeze that new medium-term austerity plan through Parliament in time for the next Eurogroup meeting. It's going to be a very tight schedule, but they will be able to get it through Parliament by July 3rd. Question is implementation, and how implementation affects those people out there with Tim Wilcox tonight, because that is really the barometer of implementation in the country. And obviously the Troika will be keeping a very close eye on how Greece is meeting the targets. Perhaps their threats are not necessarily credible. Perhaps when they say we're going to cut the funding, they don't really mean it, because they know what the repercussions of that would be for the Eurozone and for the currency. But still, Greece needs the money.
And Miranda, if there was anger in the debate tonight, next week's vote on the actual package is going to be something else, isn't it? And the reaction on the street outside.
Absolutely, and I think it would make things much better for the government if they gave immediate priority to the objective of cutting spending, because that would affect a much smaller proportion of the population, the public sector workers, and people on the street would be much less angry if they did not have to pay higher taxes every year.
Miranda, thanks very much. Let's just once again tell you that the Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou has survived a confidence vote in Parliament after garnering more than the absolute majority, just of 151 votes he needed in the 300-member legislature.
Making it much more likely, of course, he can get that vital $17 billion loan, but also that $28 billion austerity package will indeed be necessary. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay with us. Much more to come.